Your grandmother could open a near-empty refrigerator and still put a sandwich on the table that made you feel like the luckiest kid on the block. 2 slices of bread, whatever she had on hand, and somehow it tasted better than anything you could buy today. Those sandwiches were not fancy, they were not pretty, but they kept families going through tight weeks, long shifts, and empty cupboards. And the strange thing is, most of them have quietly disappeared. Not because they stopped tasting good, but because the world moved on and forgot how powerful a simple sandwich could be. Some of these were packed into metal lunchboxes for factory workers. Others were slapped together on Saturday afternoons while cartoons played in the next room. A few were so odd your friends would stare at your lunch tray. Number 24, sugar bread. White bread, a layer of butter, and a heavy pour of white sugar on top, folded in half. Some families used brown sugar. Some sprinkled cinnamon if they had it, but most did not. This was what you ate when the pantry was bare and the next check was still a week out. It showed up at kitchen tables across West Virginia, the Carolinas, and deep into the Tennessee hills from the 1930s through the 1970s. Mothers handed it to children and called it a treat because calling it what it was felt too heavy. The butter melted into the bread and the sugar gave you a rush that lasted about 20 minutes, and then you were hungry again. But for those 20 minutes, you were eating something sweet, and sweetness mattered when everything else was hard. Before I go further, for the folks who want more recipes like these all gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. It is a cookbook full of the kind of meals your people actually made. You can find it on my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not bring it up again. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Tomato sandwiches were summer's greatest gift to budget-conscious households across the rural South during the Depression and post-war years. When backyard gardens overflowed with ripe red tomatoes, families turned that abundance into simple meals costing almost nothing. The preparation required only thick slices of vine-ripened tomato, soft white bread, mayonnaise, and salt and pepper. The bread soaked up the tomatoes' juices, creating a soft texture that contrasted beautifully with the cool, sweet tart fruit. Seniors who grew up in working-class homes remember eating these standing over the kitchen sink, letting the juice drip freely. The sandwich represented self-sufficiency and home gardening when every dollar mattered. Mothers packed them for lunch when garden produce was plentiful, knowing they provided vitamins without spending precious grocery money. Today, heirloom tomato sandwiches appear on fancy restaurant menus, but nothing matches the memory of homegrown tomatoes between cheap white bread. Number 25, egg salad on white. Spreading egg salad using the rounded side of a spoon was the very first lesson a new waitress got at the rail. Knives were not allowed for this. 4 hard-boiled eggs, 2 tablespoons of mayonnaise, a pinch of celery salt, and a paper-thin slice of green pepper if you felt fancy. The bread was always white, always sliced thin, like a paper napkin folded around the filling. Waitresses cut sandwiches into triangles and stacked them on plates lined with leaf lettuce, eaten standing at the rail in under 11 minutes. The dime store counters quietly closed. The drugstore lunchrooms closed. The sandwich went with them. Your grandmother could still make one by feel. Most of her grandchildren cannot. The fried peanut butter and banana sandwich got its fame from Memphis, but it lived in kitchens long before anyone called it the Elvis. The trick, the one his cook, Mary Jenkins, figured out, was toasting the bread first, loading it with creamy peanut butter and sliced banana, pressing the halves together, and frying the whole thing in butter until the outside turned golden and the inside went soft. His father, Vernon, showed Mary the method. She said Elvis ate them at every hour, butter running down his arm, never once measuring anything. In February of 1976, he flew from Graceland to Denver at 1 in the morning to eat the Fool's Gold Loaf, a hollowed-out French bread stuffed with a jar of peanut butter, a jar of preserves, and a pound of bacon, at a hangar on the tarmac. That sandwich cost $49.95. The simple version, though, the one you could make at midnight with whatever was in the pantry, that was the one worth remembering. Fried egg and fatback biscuit was the working man's fuel that powered countless mornings across Appalachia and the rural South. Fatback, that thick slab of pure pork fat from the pig's back, would be sliced thin and fried in a cast-iron skillet until the edges turned crispy and golden while rendering out precious grease. Into that same bubbling fat went a fresh egg, the whites crisping at the edges while the yolk stayed soft and runny. The whole assembly was placed between halves of a hot buttermilk biscuit, the egg yolk breaking and mixing with the salty pork fat to create a natural sauce that soaked into the bread. This sandwich cost almost nothing to make, yet delivered protein, fat, and carbohydrates in perfect balance. Families kept fatback in the smokehouse or root cellar, ready for any morning when time was short but hunger was real. The combination of crispy pork, creamy egg, and tender biscuit created something genuinely satisfying that no modern breakfast sandwich has managed to replicate. Peanut butter and pickle sandwiches were the lunchbox legends nobody admits to loving, but many still secretly miss. Born out of the Great Depression, this odd pairing was less about culinary boldness and more about making do with what was left in the pantry. Peanut butter was cheap, packed with protein, and shelf-stable. Pickles added crunch, tang, and just enough bite to wake up plain white bread. Somehow, the combination worked. The sweet creaminess of the peanut butter and the sharp, vinegary snap of a dill or bread and butter pickle created a balance that stayed with you, whether you liked it or not. These sandwiches were slipped into wax paper and handed off like rationed gold. Some kids traded them. Others guarded them with their lives. They were cheap, they were weird, and they were unforgettable. As the decades rolled on and lunch menus got glossier, peanut butter and pickle sandwiches faded from view. It might not win a gourmet prize today, but back then, it was a masterpiece made from struggle and stubbornness. There was the Underwood Deviled Ham Can, small, white paper label, Red Devil logo, and a pull tab that required more wrist strength than any child had. The William Underwood Company started canning this spiced ham paste in 1868 out of New England, making it one of the oldest trademarked food products in American history. Your mother mixed it with a fork, just the ham, yellow mustard, maybe a scrape of mayo, and spread it across white bread so fast you barely saw the knife move. Through the 40s and 50s, that little can sat in every pantry, next to the Vienna sausages and the saltines. The flavor was sharp, peppery, salty, the kind of taste that points you to a specific kitchen. Kids who carried those sandwiches in wax paper can still describe the smell when they peeled it open at the cafeteria table. Most of them can tell you exactly who made it. She buttered the bread first, always. Then the sugar, white, granulated, poured from the bag and pressed into the butter with the back of a spoon until the crystals caught. Olive nut sandwich was the kind of lunch that turned a plain midday break into something memorable without costing more than a few coins. Back when cream cheese was a rare treat, people would mix it with chopped green olives and finely crushed pecans until it became a thick, flavorful spread. The salt of the olives gave every bite a briny pop, while the pecans added a faint, earthy crunch. Homemakers in the 1930s and 1940s loved this combination because it stretched a small block of cheese across many sandwiches. White bread made the perfect base since it was soft enough to absorb the filling without falling apart, and children enjoyed the smooth, creamy texture. Many church socials and small-town luncheons would feature trays of these sandwiches cut into neat triangles. They were easy to make ahead of time and kept well in a simple icebox when refrigeration was limited today. The mixture might feel unusual, but the contrast of tangy olives and sweet, nutty undertones remains striking for anyone willing to give this forgotten recipe another chance. One surprising sandwich, the radish and butter sandwich, combined thinly sliced radishes, easy-to-grow root vegetables thriving in even the poorest soil, with creamy butter, salt, and homemade bread. Despite its simplicity, this sandwich exemplified the era's remarkable ingenuity, transforming modest garden staples into a genuinely enjoyable meal. Radishes were incredibly affordable and grew rapidly, maturing within just 3 to 4 weeks, making them ideal for families in urgent need of sustenance. Butter, although a luxury in lean times, was often stretched sparingly, providing much-needed calories and flavor to otherwise plain sandwiches. Interestingly, radishes weren't always considered sandwich-worthy. Historically, they were seen as garnishes or mere rabbit food. Yet, necessity shifted this perception dramatically during the 1930s. Resourceful home cooks discovered that pairing crunchy radishes with salted butter masked the vegetable's peppery bite, turning a somewhat unpopular garden produce into something palatable, even delightful. The patty melt disappeared so quietly from home kitchens that nobody noticed it was gone until they looked at a diner menu and felt something like grief. It wasn't a hamburger and it wasn't a grilled cheese. It was the thing in between, which is exactly why it worked. Ground beef pressed into an oval patty on cast iron, then slid onto dark rye with Swiss and caramelized onions that had been going in butter for 20 minutes before the meat touched the pan. The whole thing went back on the griddle, pressed under something heavy, pulled when the bread was dark gold and the cheese surrendered. Patty melts appeared at Tiny Nailor's Drive-In in Los Angeles around 1950 and spread through diner culture over 2 decades, arriving in suburban kitchens by the early 1970s. The rye was the key. That slight sourness cutting through the fat of the beef and the sweetness of the onions. The ones that remember how to make it right are getting harder to find. Fried bologna sandwiches were the kind of magic only grandparents could pull off. The sort of everyday wizardry that took a slice of cheap meat and turned it into something that tasted like it belonged on a downtown diner plate. You would hear that skillet pop and hiss before you ever smelled it, and somehow that alone felt like a promise. Thick-cut bologna would curl as it hit the heat, browning until it took on that deep, savory flavor that made you forget it came from the bargain bin at the grocery store. Grandparents had this uncanny way of making simple food feel big and comforting, as if they knew exactly how to turn thrift into warmth. They would press it down with a spatula like they were working a grill at a lunch counter, then drop it onto warm bread slicked with mustard or mayonnaise. Sometimes they added a slice of cheese that melted just enough to glue everything together, and that tiny detail made the sandwich feel like a special order. Maybe it was the sizzling sound. Maybe it was the smoky smell. Or maybe it was the way grandparents cooked everything as if it were meant to matter. That sandwich was cheap and unassuming, yet the moment you bit into it, you knew it had found a permanent spot in your personal Hall of Fame. Number 25. The banana and mayonnaise sandwich. Take a ripe banana, slice it lengthwise, lay the halves on a piece of soft white bread, spread Duke's mayonnaise on the other slice, and press it together. That was lunch in the hills of eastern Kentucky and all through the Ozarks. The banana gave you sweetness and the mayonnaise gave you fat, and together they made something that sounds wrong until you try it. Grocery stores sold more bananas than any other fruit in America by the 1940s, and in the hollers where meat was scarce, a banana sandwich cost less than a nickel. Kids took them to school wrapped in wax paper. Old men ate them on the porch after supper. It was not fancy. It was not trying to be. It was a meal that asked nothing of you except hunger. Onion sandwiches carried a sharp, pungent honesty that defined working-class meals when meat was scarce and gardens provided what little families had. A thick slice of raw white onion was placed between bread spread with butter or lard, seasoned only with salt. The flavor was bold, almost aggressive, clearing sinuses and filling bellies with something substantial enough to call dinner. During the Depression, raw onions cost pennies and lasted weeks in cool cellars, making them reliable sustenance when nothing else was available. The sandwich required no cooking and could be assembled in seconds by tired workers returning home. Children learned to eat them without complaint because complaining meant going hungry. The sharpness seemed to wake up taste buds dulled by bland, poverty-era meals. Seniors today remember the sandwich with mixed emotions, recalling both the hardship it represented and the strange satisfaction it provided. What seemed like desperation food actually delivered vitamins and fullness when families had almost nothing. Number 24. Leverwurst on rye with raw onion. The smell hit you before you saw the plate, like wet leather and pepper, and the bite of raw onion came right behind. Boar's Head sliced the loaf thick at every Liggett's drugstore in Brooklyn through the 50s. The counterman layered it on seeded rye with a sharp ring of yellow onion, a smear of brown mustard, and a single dill spear set off to the side. The sandwich was loud. The onion bit, the mustard cut through. The liverwurst itself was soft, a dusky pink paste of pork liver and fat that the immigrant butchers in Yorkville had been making for 30 years before it ever reached the rail. You could eat one standing up in 4 minutes and walk back to the shop full of it. But the kids would not eat organ meats anymore by 1975. The doctors were warning about cholesterol. By 2024, Boar's Head stopped making liverwurst entirely. There was a generation of countercooks who could trim a liverwurst loaf in their sleep, and there is no one left now to teach the next one how. Nobody under 40 knows what an olive and cream cheese sandwich is, but mention it to anyone who grew up in the 1960s or 70s, and you'll get a story. The spread was simple: softened Philadelphia cream cheese, chopped green olives with the pimiento still in them, and just enough olive brine to loosen it up. Some families added pecans, others swore by walnuts. The whole thing went on crustless white bread, cut into triangles, and appeared at every baby shower, bridal luncheon, and bridge club meeting from Mobile to Minneapolis. The women who made it never used a recipe. They knew the ratio by the color of the spread: pale green with flecks of red, loose enough to smear but stiff enough to hold the bread together. One woman remembered eating her first one from a cooler in her grandmother's back seat during a road trip, and the taste, briny, creamy, cold from the ice, was the taste of every summer drive she ever took. The woman who packed that cooler has been gone for years. The sandwich went with her. Molasses butter biscuit was a sweet morning treat that sustained generations of children heading off to school or fieldwork. A fresh biscuit, still warm from the wood stove, would be split open and spread generously with butter that melted instantly into the crumb. Then came the molasses. That dark, thick syrup drizzled over the butter until it pooled in the biscuit's crevices. The combination created something between breakfast and dessert, the butter's richness cutting the molasses' intense sweetness. During hard times when sugar was expensive, molasses served as the sweetener of choice for rural families across the South. Children wrapped these sandwiches in cloth napkins, carrying them to one-room schoolhouses where they provided energy through long morning lessons. The taste was bold and distinctive, nothing like the mild sweetness of modern pastries. This sandwich represented care and creativity, proving that even the simplest ingredients could make mornings feel special. Fluffernutters were the sugar bombs of childhood, smeared between slices of Wonder Bread like sticky little secrets. Made from peanut butter and marshmallow creme, this New England classic was as sweet as the recess bell and just as anticipated. No meat, no veggies, just a sugary swirl that glued your sandwich shut and made your fingers tacky with every bite. The texture was half the fun: soft bread, gooey center, and that unmistakable stretch of marshmallow when you pulled the halves apart. They were a staple of elementary school lunch tables, always wrapped in plastic and slightly flattened from being stuffed into a backpack. Every bite tasted like skipping spelling tests and drawing dinosaurs in the margins of your notebook. The Fluffernutter was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it made you feel like you were getting away with something. Over time, it disappeared from school menus and fell out of fashion, replaced by yogurts and wraps and grown-up meals for tiny hands. Long before anyone dressed a sandwich with deli meat, families in coal country pulled lard from a tin bucket and smeared it across whatever bread they had. The lard sandwich was rendered pig fat, white and thick, on day-old bread with a pinch of salt. That was lunch. In Depression-era Iowa, Richard Willis remembered eating them as a boy, and across Appalachia and the coal towns of West Virginia, kids carried lard sandwiches in their pails because there was nothing else. Sometimes the bread was open-face and topped with cold beans, sometimes folded shut and wrapped in newspaper. The fat kept you full through a shift in the mine or a morning in the schoolhouse. It tasted like survival, and nobody pretended otherwise. The families who ate them didn't talk about it afterward. That silence said everything about what those years cost. Date and walnut tea sandwich brought a gentle sweetness to formal gatherings where coffee and soft conversation flowed, In equal measure, cooks began by simmering dates until they softened into a thick paste which they mixed with finely chopped walnuts for a filling that felt both decadent and practical. During the mid-century years, sugar could be expensive and fruit was a clever way to sweeten bread without adding costly ingredients. Tea rooms and women's clubs served these sandwiches with the crusts removed and the slices cut into delicate shapes that fit neatly on a porcelain plate. The nutty aroma paired beautifully with a hot cup of black tea and gave the impression of luxury. While remaining budget-friendly for homemakers, the mixture could be prepared a day ahead and kept in a cool pantry, which made entertaining far less stressful. Despite its elegance, this sandwich belonged to everyday life as much as it did to special occasions, making it a cherished memory for those who tasted its mellow blend of fruit and nuts. In the bleak economic landscape of the 1930s, the trusty carrot, often abundant and dirt cheap, was quietly elevated from supporting actor in stews to star ingredient in sandwich spreads like the carrot marmalade sandwich. Homemade carrot marmalade spread generously over stale bread might sound peculiar today, but during the Great Depression, it showcased a brilliant combination of thriftiness and culinary creativity. When sugar became scarce and costly, innovative homemakers cleverly utilized carrots' natural sweetness, simmering them slowly into a thick, jammy preserve to mimic traditional fruit marmalade. Notably, carrots were among the most reliably available vegetables during the Depression. Their hardiness meant nearly anyone could cultivate a patch, even with limited gardening skills. Families often had surplus carrots, providing an ideal solution to the era's pervasive hunger. To avoid waste, stale bread, previously destined for the compost heap, was refreshed by this sweet and slightly tangy marmalade, transforming it into an unexpectedly pleasant treat. Despite its humble origins, carrot marmalade gained popularity, prompting home economists of the time to distribute official recipes for this vitamin-packed, budget-friendly spread. Nobody told you tuna and apple belonged together. You had to discover it by accident at a covered dish supper, eating before anyone explained what was in it. The combination appears in junior league cookbooks and church recipe collections from the era. Star-kissed, drained and flaked, folded into Hellmann's with celery, lemon juice, and half a Granny Smith chopped small. Skippy and Hellmann's ran joint advertising campaigns in the 1970s Los Angeles Herald promoting sweet and savory combinations, validating what home cooks had already figured out. It went on white bread, or sometimes whole wheat if the household had tipped toward the health food movement. The apple browned fast if you didn't move quickly. You made it and ate it that afternoon. She made it every Tuesday after the grocery run. Nobody makes it on Tuesdays anymore. Tomato and mayonnaise sandwiches were the kind of simple perfection that could only come from grandparents who understood the power of fresh ingredients and soft white bread. A late summer tomato, sliced thick and dripping with juice, could transform the most ordinary day into something memorable. Grandparents knew how to pick them, pressing gently to feel for that perfect softness that meant the tomato had lived its best life. Then came the mayonnaise, spread edge to edge with a focus that would make a professional chef blush. The first bite was always messy in the best way, juices mixing with mayonnaise until it tasted like something from a restaurant that bragged about farm fresh produce. It was cheap, but never felt cheap. These sandwiches were like a quiet family secret, something learned only by standing in a warm kitchen while a grandparent sliced tomatoes with the same knife they had used for years. Eating it felt like eating a season, tied to gardens, porch swings, and long afternoons. Joy made from bread, tomato, and mayonnaise. Grandparents never explained it. They just handed it to you, knowing it was unforgettable. Number 21, the soup bean sandwich. Pinto beans cooked low and slow with a piece of salt pork until they fell apart. You mashed a spoonful of those beans onto a piece of cornbread or white bread, added raw onion if you had it, and ate it with your hands. This was a Monday sandwich in eastern Kentucky and southwest Virginia, where a pot of beans simmered on the stove all weekend and showed up in every form imaginable by midweek. The beans had enough starch to hold together on the bread, and the salt pork gave the whole thing a richness that disguised how cheap it really was. A 10-pound bag of pinto beans fed a family for weeks. The soup bean sandwich was proof that poverty made people creative long before anyone called it resourceful. There was a time when a sandwich was not a product. It was an answer to a question nobody asked out loud, which was, how do you feed people when the money runs out before the month does? The hillbilly sandwich did not come from a cookbook or a television show. It came from the back of the pantry, from the garden, from the smokehouse, from the woods behind the house. Every one of them solved the same problem. Turn almost nothing into something a person could hold in two hands and eat standing up, sitting on a porch step, or walking to the barn. The grocery chains replaced that knowledge with convenience, and convenience replaced memory. A generation of sandwiches disappeared not because they failed, but because they were too cheap to sell. Mustard sandwiches represented rock-bottom survival food during the hardest years of American poverty, yet they carried surprising dignity in their simplicity. 2 slices of bread spread generously with bright yellow mustard created a meal costing virtually nothing but still feeling intentional. The tangy, vinegary bite provided flavor intensity that plain bread could never deliver alone. Children walked to school with these in their lunch pails during the Depression, eating them without shame because everyone understood hard times. The mustard's sharpness fooled the brain into thinking something more substantial had been consumed. Families kept large jars of cheap yellow mustard in pantries, knowing it could stretch meals when nothing remained. The sandwich required no refrigeration and could be made by the youngest child. Seniors who survived those lean years remember mustard sandwiches with quiet pride, knowing they represented resilience and determination to eat something rather than nothing. Number 23, olive nut on white toast. Stirring cream cheese soft with the back of a fork was how the recipe started. Chopped green olives with the pimento still in them, and toasted black walnuts, all folded until the mixture turned pale yellow, flecked with red and brown. Spread on white toast and cut diagonally. The sandwich showed up in every Better Homes and Gardens cookbook for 15 years and then quietly disappeared. Cream cheese moved on to bagels. Olives moved on to martinis. The black walnuts went the hardest because nobody was harvesting them anymore. The olive nut was simple and beautiful in an odd way, like a tea party leftover that the working world had borrowed for an hour. Now you can go a year of eating in restaurants and never once see one on a plate. Ham salad started the way everything started in those kitchens, with leftovers. The Sunday ham came out of the oven on a platter, fed the family through dinner and cold slices on Monday, and by Tuesday the rest went through the hand-cranked meat grinder that was bolted to the edge of the counter. You could hear it from the next room, the rhythmic grinding of metal teeth turning cooked meat into something spreadable. She mixed the ground ham with mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, a little mustard, maybe diced celery if she had it, and packed it into a Tupperware bowl that lived in the refrigerator all week. It fed whoever needed feeding: school lunches, afternoon snacks, a quick supper when nobody felt like cooking. The beauty of ham salad was its refusal to go to waste. Nothing was thrown out. The bone went into soup, the fat went into beans, and the last scraps went through that grinder until there was nothing left but the smell of smoke on your hands. Bacon grease toast was pure mountain efficiency, transforming yesterday's cooking fat into today's breakfast in under 3 minutes. After frying bacon, families saved the rendered grease in tin cans kept near the stove, ready for any cooking need. A thick slice of homemade bread would be placed directly in the warm skillet, absorbing the smoky bacon fat until the bottom turned golden and crispy. Flipped once, the bread emerged transformed, carrying the essence of bacon without requiring any actual meat. Some families sprinkled salt or sugar on top, depending on preference. Others ate it plain, letting the rich pork flavor speak for itself. This wasn't poverty food in the shameful sense, but rather brilliant resourcefulness that wasted nothing. The bread's texture became extraordinary, crispy on the outside, yet soft within, infused with smoky richness. Bacon grease toast fed families during lean times and flush times alike, proving great breakfasts needed nothing more than bread and leftover fat. The tuna and cream cheese sandwich was what your grandmother made when she wanted to feed you something fancy that was also suspiciously efficient. It was a relic from the 1940s, a time when mayonnaise was not the only binder in town and lemon juice felt like fine dining. Chilled tuna blended with cream cheese, a touch of citrus, and sometimes even crushed pecans or chopped celery. This sandwich wore a pressed napkin and gave off a whiff of Sunday brunch in the cafeteria. Kids either loved it or politely folded it back into the sandwich bag and focused on their chocolate milk instead. The bread was often buttered, soft, and crustless if someone was feeling generous. What made this sandwich stick in the mind was its smoothness, its unexpected tang, and how it seemed to signal that whoever packed your lunch had a plan. This was not a slapdash peanut butter job. This was intentional. Over time, tuna salad took the spotlight and cream cheese retreated to bagels and frosting. But in lunchboxes from another era, it played a surprisingly elegant role. There was a tub of bologna salad behind the deli glass, right next to the pimento cheese. It started as mock ham salad during the Depression. Chopped grocery store bologna run through a hand grinder with hard-boiled eggs, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, and enough mayonnaise to hold it together. It fed families who couldn't afford actual ham but refused to send kids to school empty-handed. A pound of bologna cost a fraction of what ham ran, and ground up with the fixings, nobody at that lunch table knew the difference. In Detroit and across the Deep South, it became the thing itself. Mothers scooped it onto white bread with the confidence of women serving a holiday spread. The taste was salty, tangy, creamy, with pickle crunch holding it together. By the 80s, prepackaged meats pushed it out. But somewhere, someone is still grinding that bologna by hand. Pineapple cream cheese sandwich was a bright surprise in an era when winter fruit was rare, and often canned families would drain crushed pineapple until it was almost dry, then fold it gently into softened cream cheese to create a light tropical spread when placed between thin slices of crustless bread. It offered a refreshing contrast to the heavier savory meals of the 1950s. This sandwich appeared at baby showers, church potlucks, and summer picnics where its cheerful flavor reminded guests of faraway places. Many cooks added a touch of lemon juice to keep the filling tangy, and to balance the sweetness of the fruit. Children loved the mild sweetness, and adults appreciated how easy it was to prepare. Especially when other ingredients were hard to find, the mixture also stored well in a cool kitchen, so it could be made in the morning and served in the afternoon with no loss of texture. Even now, one bite of this soft and creamy blend can transport a person to those lively mid-century gatherings. At a time when pantries were sparse, one modest vegetable quietly rose to culinary prominence, notably paired with vinegar to create the onion and vinegar sandwich. Thinly sliced onions marinated in tangy vinegar with just a pinch of sugar might sound like a questionable lunch choice today, but during the Great Depression, this humble sandwich was a household staple. Vinegar, cheaply produced and easily accessible, became an indispensable tool for Depression-era cooks trying to stretch limited ingredients into flavorful meals. Onions thrived effortlessly in backyard gardens, making them abundant even when money was scarce. But onions had another appeal. Their sharp bite helped mask the taste of stale bread, a constant companion during hard economic times. Home cooks discovered that marinating onions briefly in vinegar not only mellowed their pungency, but also produced a refreshingly tart flavor, transforming the simplest sandwich into a delicacy. Remarkably, onions were so valued that Depression-era food guides suggested planting them as an emergency food supply, alongside potatoes. This sandwich perfectly encapsulated the ingenuity of an era when resourcefulness wasn't merely admirable, but essential for survival. The Western egg sandwich lived in the middle ground between breakfast and lunch that the 1970s always seemed full of. Scrambled eggs cooked with diced ham, green bell pepper, and white onion, just set enough to hold together, spooned onto thick white bread or a Kaiser roll while still warm. The story involves railroad workers heading west through Denver, the ham and eggs as portable protein, the peppers as whatever grew nearby, and whether accurate or not, it became a short-order counter-staple through the post-war decades, appearing on coffee shop menus from Ohio to Oregon without explanation. Your grandmother made it on Saturday mornings when the eggs needed to be used. She never called it a Denver sandwich. She called it eggs with the leftover ham. You haven't made it since she stopped cooking. Potted meat sandwiches were born from pantry shelves that never had much but always had enough. That small can of potted meat, easy to overlook today, was once a dependable meal when money had to stretch farther than anyone wanted to admit. Grandparents mixed it with diced onions or pickles to give it flavor that felt almost gourmet. Spread thick on soft bread, it became the kind of sandwich you relied on when time or money were running low. Potted meat had this salty, savory richness that tasted like a diner sandwich when seasoned just right. Grandparents knew how to make a can feel like a full meal, how to make you feel like nothing was missing, even if life was difficult. Eating it felt like stepping back into a kitchen built on hope and habit. They opened the can, mixed it by instinct, and served it without fuss. That simplicity was part of its charm. Potted meat sandwiches were built on resilience, care, and the belief that flavor does not depend on wealth. Number 23. The fried green tomato sandwich. You sliced a green tomato thick, at least a 1/4 inch, dredged it in cornmeal with salt and pepper, and fried it in a cast iron skillet until the coating crackled. Then you laid it on white bread, sometimes with a smear of mayonnaise, sometimes plain. The tomato stayed tart and firm inside that cornmeal shell, nothing like a ripe tomato. This was a late summer sandwich in the Appalachian foothills, when the garden was producing faster than anyone could eat and the first frost was still weeks away. You used the green ones because the ripe ones were going into canning jars. Nothing went to waste. The fried green tomato sandwich was what happened when practicality and flavor landed on the same plate. Sardine sandwiches delivered complete protein and essential fats to families who couldn't afford fresh fish or expensive meats during lean times. Small tins of sardines packed in oil sat on pantry shelves, ready to become instant meals whenever hunger called. The tiny fish were mashed onto bread with a fork, their salty, oily richness spreading easily. Some families added sliced onion or a squeeze of lemon to cut through the fishiness. The flavor was bold and unmistakably oceanic, filling kitchens with a distinctive aroma. A single tin could feed 2 people when stretched with plenty of bread, making sardines remarkably economical. The calcium from soft, edible bones provided nutrition that growing children desperately needed. Sardine sandwiches appeared in factory lunch pails and school bags throughout working-class America. Seniors remember their fathers eating these after long shifts. The tin opened with a key that peeled back the lid. The sandwich carried honest nourishment, tasting better than its humble reputation suggested. Number 22. Welsh rarebit on toast. The sauce was the whole sandwich. Sharp cheddar melted with milk, beer, dry mustard, and a few drops of Worcestershire, poured thick over a slab of toasted white loaf, and slid under the broiler until the top went gold. You could eat it with a fork. The lunch rail kept a small saucepan of it warm and stirred. A trucker could order Welsh rarebit, eat it like a hot lunch with coffee, and be on the road by 1/4 past. The sandwich required a real sauce, and the sauce required someone behind the rail who could pay attention. As the counters moved to faster food, Welsh rarebit was the earliest item to vanish from the slate. Nobody was asking for it anyway. If ham salad was a mother's invention, the cheese and grape jelly sandwich was a child's. Kraft ran recipe cards in the 1960s and 70s, pushing every combination of Velveeta and processed American cheese they could dream up, and somewhere in that golden age of supermarket ingenuity, grape jelly met a slice of cheddar, and nobody looked back. Kids made it themselves. That was half the appeal. 2 slices of white bread, a thick square of cheese peeled from its plastic sleeve, a knife load of Welch's grape pressed together and eaten over the sink the same way their fathers ate liverwurst. Parents who caught you making one shook their heads but said nothing because the sweet, salty logic of it actually worked. The cheese held its ground against the sugar, the jelly cut through the salt, and for about 3 minutes you had something that tasted like you'd invented it yourself. You hadn't. Every kid on the block already knew. A fried mush sandwich turned yesterday's cornmeal porridge into this morning's crispy breakfast in the time it took to heat a skillet. Leftover cornmeal mush was poured into loaf pans the night before, where it would set firm as it cooled. Come morning, thick slices were cut from the solidified mush and fried in lard or bacon grease until both sides developed a golden crust that crackled when bitten. These crispy slices were placed between bread or simply eaten with syrup poured over top. The texture contrast was remarkable, the exterior shattering to reveal a creamy, corn-sweet interior that brought comfort and sustenance. This sandwich stretched resources brilliantly, turning one pot of mush into multiple meals across 2 days. Farm families across the Midwest and South relied on this transformation, knowing that nothing cooked should ever go to waste. Children especially loved the sweet corn flavor combined with the satisfying crunch, making it a breakfast worth waking early for. The lettuce sandwich was what you got when there was nothing else, and yet it became something more. Just 2 slices of bread and a few crisp leaves in between, maybe with a swipe of butter or a dusting of salt if someone was feeling generous. It was minimalist, it was plain, but in a strange way, it was also pure. In the early 20th century, when meat was a luxury and refrigeration was not guaranteed, the lettuce sandwich became a reliable go-to. It was light, refreshing, almost delicate in a time when food was anything but. Packed into school lunches, it was easy to make, hard to mess up, and always surprising in how much it satisfied. Kids might groan, but they still ate it, and maybe even liked it. Over time, it faded into punchlines and parody, replaced by protein-heavy, sauce-drenched monsters that took 3 napkins to conquer. But the lettuce sandwich was never trying to impress. It was just trying to get the job done. And sometimes, that was enough. The smell of a cheese dream coming out of the oven could fill a whole house. Sharp cheddar bubbling over toasted white bread, the faint char of tomato sauce underneath turning sweet in the heat. Cheese dreams were the Depression-era answer to Feeding Company when the pantry was bare. A 1932 San Jose News article called them the newest favorite sandwich, though Good Housekeeping had featured them by 1918 as a luncheon dish. The recipe was simple: bread, butter, a thick slab of cheese, mustard, and cayenne, browned on both sides or slid under the broiler until the cheese pooled and crisped. Some added a tomato slice or bacon if the household could manage, served with olives on the side because even cheap suppers deserved presentation. They called them dreams because cheese on bread was as close to luxury as most families got. The grilled cheese replaced it and erased the name. Cucumber mint sandwich offered a cooling relief on warm afternoons when kitchens grew hot, and air conditioning was a distant dream. Thin slices of freshly peeled cucumber were layered on buttered bread, along with finely chopped mint leaves, creating a sandwich that felt both elegant and refreshing. Popular at garden parties and bridal teas of the 1920s and 1930s, it became a symbol of easy hospitality. The subtle crunch of cucumber mixed with the fragrant mint made each bite feel crisp and light. Butter acted as a seal, keeping the bread from growing soggy during long outdoor events. Hosts often chilled the sandwiches before serving, so the flavors would meld and the texture remain firm, though simple. This sandwich carried a quiet sophistication that appealed to anyone seeking a brief escape from heavier fare. And even today, its delicate balance of herb and vegetable stands as a reminder that elegance often comes from the simplest ingredients handled with care and intention. The Great Depression, food scarcity pushed resourcefulness to new heights, turning even backyard weeds into life-saving nourishment. A prime example was the dandelion greens sandwich, made from tender, freshly foraged dandelion greens sautéed briefly in bacon drippings or butter, proving the old adage true: one person's weed is another person's lunch. Dandelions flourished freely, thriving on roadsides and lawns, offering a nutritious, vitamin-rich option readily available to anyone willing to forage. Interestingly, dandelions weren't always considered nuisances. Settlers historically cultivated them for their nutritional value, containing more iron and calcium than many grocery store greens today. During the Depression, families who knew this little fact relied heavily on these wild greens to fill nutritional gaps left by their otherwise sparse meals. With fats like butter or precious bacon drippings in short supply, home cooks learned to carefully ration these staples, just enough to tame the green's natural bitterness. Ironically, modern gardeners battle relentlessly against dandelions with chemicals and lawnmowers, unaware their ancestors would have gladly turned that lawn invasion into supper. hot open-faced roast beef, white bread flat on a plate, overlapping slices of Sunday's leftover roast beef, then the gravy brown and glossy from drippings, flour, and beef stock, poured so generously the bread disappeared beneath it, was the kind of meal that required a fork and a knife but cost less than $1.50 and still felt like effort. In the upper Midwest, they called it a commercial. Beef commercial, turkey commercial. Diner shorthand on menus from Minnesota to Wisconsin through the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. You ordered it because it was cold and the mashed potatoes cost 30 cents extra, and you always got them. The home version was made on Mondays from Sunday's roast. The drippings scraped from the refrigerator where they'd solidified overnight into a rust-colored disc that smelled of everything good the oven had done to the meat. When the Sunday roast stopped, this disappeared with it. Sardine and mustard sandwiches were the bold, fearless meals grandparents made when they wanted flavor, nutrition, and thrift. All at once, sardines came in tins that waited on the pantry shelf like hidden treasures. Salty and tender with enough natural oil to feel restaurant-rich, grandparents mixed them with mustard, sometimes adding onions or a splash of vinegar, and spread the mixture with the confidence of someone making a seafood cafe special. And honestly, it tasted like it belonged there. Sardines had that deep, briny flavor that made the sandwich feel worldly and far more expensive than it was. These meals filled you up and stayed in your memory long after, teaching you something about trying foods that looked humble but tasted big. Grandparents valued strong flavors, meals that woke you up and proved that good food was about skill, not money. Sardine and mustard sandwiches were a small act of boldness and a thrifty masterpiece. Number 20, the fatback biscuit. Fatback is the slab of pure fat cut from the back of a hog, no meat in it at all. You sliced it thin, fried it in a dry skillet until it rendered and turned golden, then laid those crispy slices inside a split buttermilk biscuit. The grease that came out of the fatback went right back onto the biscuit. This was a working man's breakfast in the mountains of North Carolina and Virginia from the early 1900s through the 1960s. Loggers and miners ate it because the fat kept you full through a 10-hour shift when nothing else would. Nobody pretended it was health food. It was fuel, pure and simple, and it cost almost nothing because fatback was the cheapest cut the butcher sold. Potted meat sandwiches turned tiny cans of processed meat spread into filling meals that sustained working families across America. The small, affordable cans contained finely ground meat mixed with seasonings and gelatin, creating a spreadable paste covering bread easily. The flavor was salty and vaguely meaty, with smooth texture that children found less intimidating than tougher cuts. Spread thick between slices of soft white bread, sometimes with mustard or pickle slices, potted meat made a complete sandwich for pennies. The cans required no refrigeration until opened, making them perfect pantry staples for homes without reliable icebox access. Families bought them by the case when money allowed, stockpiling affordable protein against uncertain times. The sandwiches appeared at picnics, in lunchboxes, and on dinner tables when paychecks ran thin. Children grew up eating them without realizing how clever their mothers were at stretching resources. Today, potted meat still exists in stores, a quiet reminder of survival cooking. Number 20, Underwood deviled ham on rye. Peeling back that red foil tin was the sound of a lunchbox opening from 1922 through about 1968. The tin held a paste of finely ground ham, mustard, vinegar, and spices that the William Underwood Company had been selling out of New England since 1868. You scooped 2 tablespoons onto rye, pressed a second slice on top, and cut diagonally. The tin had a small red devil on the label that had not changed in 50 years. It was the oldest registered trademark on a food product in the country. Mothers packed deviled ham sandwiches in metal pails for steel mill shifts and for school because the paste held up through a 6-hour day in any weather. But the kids called it pink mush by the 70s, and the doctors said the salt was too high. The deviled ham sandwich went to ground, and the small red devil on the tin became the only thing about it most Americans remembered. Thomas's sold date nut bread in a can, a small, heavy cylinder that you opened from both ends and pushed the loaf out whole, dark as gingerbread and dense with chopped dates and walnuts. You sliced it thin, spread each round with cold cream cheese, and ate it in the afternoon with tea or coffee while the house was quiet. It was a tea room sandwich before it was a home sandwich, the kind of thing women's clubs served at luncheons in the 1950s alongside finger sandwiches and fruit salad in stemmed glasses. By the 70s, the canned loaf had moved from tea rooms to kitchen counters, and the women who bought it didn't need a club meeting to justify the indulgence. They ate it standing at the counter the way men ate liverwurst, quickly, alone, with no one watching. Thomas's still makes it, but the women who sliced it thin enough to see light through the bread are mostly gone now, and their daughters buy sourdough instead. Sawmill gravy biscuit was the quintessential Southern breakfast. Thick white gravy ladled over a split buttermilk biscuit that could be eaten with hands or fork. The gravy started with meat drippings, usually from sausage or bacon, mixed with flour to create a roux that thickened as milk was slowly added. Black pepper provided heat and visual interest, the dark specks scattered through the creamy white sauce. Split biscuits were arranged on plates as the gravy was spooned generously over top, the bread absorbing the rich sauce while maintaining enough structure to be picked up and eaten. This wasn't a sandwich in the traditional sense, but rather an open-faced creation that satisfied hunger like nothing else could. Sawmill workers and loggers depended on this hearty breakfast to fuel brutal physical labor. The gravy stretched a small amount of meat into a meal that fed entire families, proving that ingenuity and skill could multiply resources. Sloppy Joes were the lunchtime wild card, messy, meaty, and guaranteed to stain your shirt. Every cafeteria had a day when trays were heavy with hamburger buns oozing with ground beef cooked in tomato sauce and mystery spices. It was not elegant, it was not clean, but it was comforting. Sloppy Joes were everything lunch was supposed to be: warm, hearty, and just a little unruly. One bite and half of it landed on your tray. That was the rule. Napkins were never enough. These sandwiches showed up in school lunch lines, birthday parties, and weeknight dinners when parents had 30 minutes and a pound of beef. They were versatile, easy, and crowd-pleasing in the way only something unapologetically simple could be. The sauce was sweet and tangy, the meat hearty, the bun soft and doomed from the first bite. You could smell Sloppy Joe Day before you saw it on your plate. Over the years, they lost their place to healthier, neater options, but no one ever forgot them. Cold baked beans mashed between two slices of bread. That was a factory worker's lunch in every mill town from Fall River to Flint. British immigrants brought the habit to American shores, and it settled into the lunch pails of men who worked 12-hour shifts and needed something that held together in a tin box until noon. The beans were Saturday night's leftovers, thick with molasses and salt pork remnants, scooped cold onto buttered bread and pressed flat. Sometimes a tomato slice if the garden was producing, sometimes a leaf of lettuce, mostly just beans and bread. A 1929 sandwich cookbook recommended them mashed smooth with mayonnaise and chopped onion for variety, and dozens of factory towns had their own versions, some with a drizzle of vinegar, some with a smear of mustard across the top slice. The taste was sweet, salty, dense, the kind of lunch that sat heavy in your stomach and kept you standing through the shift. When the factories closed and lunch counters replaced pails, the baked bean sandwich quietly left the table. Peanut butter and bacon sandwich was a bold combination that balanced salty smoke with creamy sweetness. Long before gourmet burgers stole the spotlight, roadside cafes served this hearty pairing to travelers who needed energy for long drives across dusty highways. Thick strips of crispy bacon were layered over smooth peanut butter on toasted bread, and the heat softened the spread just enough to create a rich, savory blend. Families adopted the recipe during the 1940s when both ingredients were affordable sources of protein and fat, making it a dependable choice for a quick dinner or late-night snack. Soldiers returning from war often requested it as a comforting taste of home, while children loved the mix of flavors that felt like an adventure. In every bite, the sandwich was easy to pack for school lunches and stayed satisfying without refrigeration. Its daring balance of smoky and sweet still surprises modern palates, proving that mid-century cooks were never afraid to push the boundaries of flavor. Throughout the hardships of the Great Depression, creativity in the kitchen became as vital as bread itself, leading to culinary experiments that modern taste buds might find curious. Among these unusual creations was the humble yet surprisingly refreshing cucumber and sugar sandwich. Thinly sliced cucumbers lightly dusted with sugar, sandwiched between slices of bread. Sugar may seem extravagant for the 1930s, yet households often had small reserves carefully rationed for moments exactly like this, transforming bland cucumbers into something akin to dessert. Garden cucumbers, prolific and hardy, grew abundantly, becoming the unsung heroes of many Depression-era meals. Interestingly, cucumbers were favored because they matured rapidly, providing a dependable source of nutrition when pantry staples were uncertain. Clever homemakers discovered sprinkling sugar over cucumbers masked their watery blandness, turning a simple vegetable sandwich into an affordable treat. Even kids who usually avoided vegetables happily ate it. In fact, this unlikely pairing became popular enough to feature in homemaking pamphlets of the era, billed as a sweet sandwich children would actually finish. Before anyone questioned whether a frozen fish stick belonged between two slices of white bread, there was a generation of children who knew exactly how good it was. If the roast was Sunday and the gravy was Monday, the fish stick sandwich was Wednesday. Gorton's of Gloucester, Massachusetts, which introduced frozen fish sticks during the 1950s as part of the first wave of foods marketed during the television advertising boom, crispy and mild and completely acceptable to children who refused anything that smelled too strongly of the sea. Sticks baked until the coating cracked, transferred hot onto soft white bread with tartar sauce from a jar. The bread steamed slightly against the heat, which was the whole point. That warmth transferring through, making it part of the meal instead of just its container. These were after-school sandwiches, lunchbox sandwiches, the sandwiches of households where the freezer did serious work. They went quiet when families decided frozen fish sticks were beneath them. Fried potatoes on bread were the kind of sandwich that made you feel like you had stumbled into a diner, even when you were sitting at your grandparents' kitchen table. Potatoes were one of the most reliable foods around, cheap, filling, and always ready to become something comforting. Grandparents would slice them thin or cube them small, fry them in a pan until they were crisp on the outside and soft on the inside, and then pile them between slices of warm bread. Sometimes they added a little salt, sometimes a little pepper, and sometimes whatever leftover fat they had in the pan to give it that extra restaurant flair. It was simple, but it ate like a full meal. The sandwich was heavy in the best way, warm, golden, and satisfying from the first bite to the last. You could hear the potatoes sizzling long before you sat down, and that sound alone told you that something good was coming your way. This was the kind of food that filled your stomach and your memory at the same time. It tasted like early mornings, like long afternoons, like comfort without cost. Grandparents understood that potatoes could be transformed into a dozen different meals, but this one always felt special. It had that diner-style nostalgia, that roadside cafe charm, even though it was made with nothing but potatoes, bread, and a little bit of time. Fried potato sandwiches were cheap, sure, but they carried a kind of richness you could not put a price on. Number 19. The apple butter and hot biscuit. Every fall in the Appalachian Hills, families gathered around a copper kettle set over an open fire and stirred apples for hours. The apples cooked down with cinnamon, cloves, and a little sugar until they turned into a thick, dark spread that tasted like autumn had been concentrated into a jar. The stirring was the hard part. You used a long wooden paddle and you never stopped, because if the apple butter scorched on the bottom, the whole batch was ruined. Some families kept the fire going from dawn until after dark. Children took turns with the paddle. Neighbors came over to help and stayed for supper. The apple butter went into mason jars and lined the shelves of the root cellar, and it lasted all winter. When you split a hot biscuit straight from the oven and spread that dark apple butter across the steaming inside, the heat from the biscuit loosened the spices and the whole kitchen smelled like October. It was the simplest sandwich in the world, bread and fruit. But the fruit had been transformed by 12 hours of stirring, and the bread had been made by hand that same morning, and together they carried the weight of an entire season's labor. You could buy apple butter in a jar at the store by the 1970s, but it was not the same. The store version was thinner, sweeter, and missing the smokiness that came from cooking outdoors over hardwood coals. The real thing required a community, a fire, and a full day of work, and that is exactly why it disappeared. Nobody has that kind of time anymore, but the people who remember it will tell you that no sandwich since has tasted half as good. Vienna sausage sandwiches transformed small canned sausages into quick meals that children and adults devoured during the mid-20th century. The tiny, pale sausages came packed in broth, soft enough to eat cold from the can or sliced lengthwise onto bread. Their mild, slightly smoky flavor appealed to picky eaters while providing protein costing less than fresh meat. Mothers appreciated how cans stored indefinitely in pantries, ready for emergencies or unexpected mouths to feed. The sausages were mashed with a fork or sliced thin, then layered on bread with mustard or mayonnaise. Some families added onions or pickles for crunch. The sandwich assembled in minutes without cooking, perfect for hot summer days when lighting the stove meant heating the entire house. Children often asked for these specifically, finding the small sausages more appealing than mysterious lunch meats. Seniors remember raiding pantries for Vienna sausage cans as after-school snacks. The cans represented affordable, satisfying, protein-rich meals. Number 19. Cottage cheese on date nut bread. Slicing the bread out of a tin can was the strange small ritual at the start. Thomas's and B&M both sold dense, dark, sweet date nut loaves shaped exactly to the can, and the cook sliced thick and never toasted. Cottage cheese went on cold, a generous scoop of small curd, lightly salted, with one thin round of canned pineapple on top. The sandwich was strange and beautiful, like an afternoon dressed up just enough to feel like an event you had not earned but were grateful for. You could order it at Schraft's with a glass of iced tea, and the waitress would set it down on a paper doily. It was on every Schraft's menu for 20 years, and it disappeared the year Schraft's itself began to close stores. The date nut bread in a can went out of production at B&M in 1992. Women in their 80s still remember the exact taste, and there is no place left that will make it for them. In the South, a pineapple sandwich was not a joke. It was a real thing made by real women who saw nothing strange about laying a ring of canned Dole pineapple on a slice of white bread spread with Duke's mayonnaise. The tang of the fruit against the richness of the mayo was a flavor profile that made perfect sense to anyone who'd grown up eating sweet pickles on ham. That push and pull between sugar and fat was the whole architecture of Southern sandwich making. Some added a slice of American cheese, others sprinkled the pineapple with a little salt. The most committed version grilled it, letting the cheese melt and the pineapple caramelize until the kitchen smelled like a county fair griddle. It sounds impossible until you taste it, and then it sounds like your grandmother knew something about flavor balance that culinary school couldn't teach. The pineapple had to be canned. Fresh was too tart, too wet, too unpredictable. Control was part of the recipe. Fried apple biscuit brought orchard sweetness to the breakfast table, combining quickly cooked apples with fresh biscuits for a meal that felt almost like dessert. Apples were sliced thin and fried in butter with a sprinkle of sugar and cinnamon until they softened and their edges began to caramelize. The warm fruit was spooned onto split biscuits, the juices soaking into the bread while the apple slices provided tender sweetness. During apple season, this sandwich appeared regularly on farm tables, using fruit that might otherwise go to waste before it could be properly preserved. The preparation took barely 5 minutes, yet created something that children and adults alike looked forward to. Some families added a drizzle of cream or a pat of butter for extra richness. The combination of warm spiced fruit and tender biscuit represented the best of country cooking, where seasonal abundance met morning hunger. Hot browns were not just sandwiches, they were events. Hailing from Louisville, Kentucky, the hot brown was the kind of school lunch you did not expect to see in your lunchbox. But when you did, everything else faded away. It was open-faced, built on toasted bread, and layered with turkey bacon and a thick, rich Mornay sauce that made it feel like something that belonged in a fancy hotel, not the corner of a cafeteria tray. The whole thing was broiled until bubbly, golden, and just messy enough to feel indulgent. It smelled like home. It tasted like someone had really tried. Most kids stared at it, confused. But for those who knew what they were looking at, it was heaven. Each bite was creamy, salty, and warm, something between comfort food and special occasion. You ate it with a fork, or tried to. It was not meant to be neat. It was meant to fill you up and slow you down. Today, you will find them in restaurants, dressed up and modernized. But nothing hits like the homemade version packed with love. In the 1930s, two things sat in nearly every American pantry: a jar of peanut butter and a jar of mayonnaise. Someone put them together on bread, and the peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich became a survival staple that lasted decades. The richness of peanut butter against the tang of mayo creates something unexpectedly balanced, almost savory, with enough fat and protein to carry a body through hard work. Skippy hit shelves in '33. Miracle Whip arrived the same year, and both gave families affordable staples that stretched across every meal. Kids ate these 5 days running because there was nothing else, and complaining about food was something you did not do. The sandwich held through the '50s, mostly in the South, where Duke's mayo and thick peanut butter on white bread was as ordinary as breathing. It slipped away not because anyone turned against it. It just got buried under the choices that came after the lean years ended. Hot slaw. Sandwich turned leftover cabbage into a warm and hearty meal that fit perfectly with the frugal habits of the Great Depression. Families would shred cabbage, onions, and carrots, then cook them down with vinegar, sugar, and a hint of mustard until the mixture became tender and tangy. This hot slaw was piled generously onto buttered buns or thick slices of bread, making a filling dinner when meat was out of reach. The heat of the slaw softened the bread slightly, creating a comforting texture that felt indulgent. Despite its simple ingredients, diners and boarding houses across the Midwest served it as a reliable daily special, while home cooks appreciated how it stretched a small garden harvest into a satisfying supper. Its aroma of sweet and sour cabbage would fill the kitchen and invite everyone to the table long after those lean years ended. The memory of that steaming sandwich lingered as proof that thrift and taste can live side by side. In a time when food waste was practically unthinkable, even potato scraps found their way onto dinner tables as an ingenious sandwich filling known as the fried potato peel sandwich. During the Great Depression, resourcefulness wasn't just admired, it was essential for survival. Potato peels, typically discarded today without a second glance, became the surprise stars of family meals when frugal cooks discovered that frying them crisp and sprinkling a touch of salt transformed kitchen waste into an affordable delicacy. Potatoes were abundant, inexpensive, and nutritious, making them a cornerstone of Depression-era cooking. Yet their peels often held valuable nutrients, something homemakers recognized instinctively, long before modern nutritionists praised potato skins as vitamin-packed. Clever cooks stretched resources by saving these peelings, crisping them to crunchy perfection, and layering them between slices of bread for a sandwich that was satisfying, flavorful, and, importantly, dirt cheap. Remarkably, newspapers and food columns of the 1930s openly suggested frying potato peels to add bulk and nutrition to scarce diets, turning desperation into culinary inspiration. The French dip at home arrived in suburban kitchens in the early 1960s and stayed through the 70s as something that seemed fancier than it was. Cole's Restaurant and Philippe's, both in Los Angeles, have argued since 1918 about who first dropped a bun into pan drippings and called it lunch. But the genius was the cup of warm au jus beside the sandwich, turning eating into a ritual requiring technique. At home, thin sliced deli roast beef, broth simmered with garlic and a bay leaf, crusty Italian bread, provolone under the broiler for 3 minutes. The dipping cup was just a coffee mug. Children who grew up with these sandwiches learned the correct procedure, a quick drag through the au jus, not a soak. The bread should still have resistance when you bit it. The ones who soaked were corrected. That small instruction, passed at the dinner table, is the kind of knowledge that goes quiet with the people who held it. butter and sugar sandwiches were the quiet little treat that felt like a celebration even when there was nothing special going on. Grandparents would take soft white bread, spread a generous layer of butter across it, and sprinkle just enough sugar to make it sparkle. Toast it lightly, and suddenly you had something that tasted like pastry from a bakery window. The butter melted into every corner of the bread, and the sugar turned into this delicate crunch that made the whole thing feel indulgent, despite being made from the simplest ingredients in the kitchen. It was sweet, without trying too hard, comforting without being heavy, and somehow tasted like more than the sum of its parts. When grandparents handed it to you warm, you felt like you were being given a secret treasure, one of those homemade miracles that adults forget about but kids remember forever. It was cheap, but it never tasted cheap. The flavor made you feel like you were eating dessert, even though it was technically just bread, butter, and sugar. Maybe that is why it stuck with so many people. It was the taste of being young, of having someone take the time to make you something small but meaningful. Butter and sugar sandwiches were proof that the simplest foods could make the biggest memories, and that a tiny bit of sweetness could carry you a long way. Number 18. The sardine and cracker sandwich. A tin of sardines cost a dime at the general store, and it kept on the shelf for years without refrigeration. You peeled back the tin lid, laid the sardines on saltine crackers, added a drop of hot sauce if you had a bottle around, and that was lunch. Coal miners in West Virginia and Kentucky carried sardine tins in their lunch pails because the fish did not spoil in the heat of the mine. Farmers kept a few tins in the barn for the same reason. The oil in the tin was salty and rich, and some people poured it right over the crackers. It was protein that traveled well and asked nothing of you in return. No cooking, no preparation, no cleanup. Just peel, eat, and throw the tin in the trash. Crackling bread sandwiches combined two Southern traditions into one gloriously rich meal that wasted nothing from the family hog. Cracklings, the crispy bits left after rendering pork fat into lard, were stirred into cornbread batter before baking, creating bread studded with salty, crunchy pork pieces. Sliced thick and still warm, the crackling bread was eaten between pieces of regular bread or simply split and buttered. The flavor was intensely porky, salty, and satisfying in ways that plain cornbread could never match. This sandwich represented the waste-nothing philosophy defining rural Southern cooking during hard times. Every scrap of the pig found purpose, including the crispy remnants of rendering. Families made crackling bread during hog killing season, when lard production created pounds of cracklings. The bread kept well for days, becoming sandwich material for lunch pails and quick suppers. Seniors from rural areas remember the smoky aroma filling kitchens and the satisfying crunch of crackling studded bread. Number 18. Watercress with butter. Trimming the crusts with a wet knife was how the small ceremony started. The bread was crustless white, paper thin, spread with sweet butter from end to end. Watercress went on rinsed and picked over, laid in a dense green carpet that almost glowed against the white. A second slice pressed on top, the sandwich cut into 4 neat triangles on a paper doily. A department store clerk on her lunch break, a teacher on a 40-minute window, a Saturday shopper into the city. All of them could order one and feel the day had been a small occasion. The watercress trade was supplied by a handful of farms, and as those farms shrank, the sandwich shrank with them. The tea sandwich tradition is mostly gone now, and watercress with butter went with it. The men who ate sardine sandwiches did not apologize for them. They peeled back the tin lid with the key, laid the small silver fish across dark rye bread, squeezed lemon from a wedge in the refrigerator door, added a line of hot mustard, and ate at the kitchen table with a glass of beer and the evening paper. The sardines came packed in olive oil or mustard sauce, imported from Portugal or Norway, and the brands mattered. King Oscar for the purists, Beechcliff for the budget-minded, Brunswick for the ones who bought whatever was on sale. During the Depression, sardines were protein you could afford when meat was a luxury, and that reputation clung to the fish long after the hard times ended. By the 70s, a sardine sandwich was a working man's lunch, eaten without ceremony. The smell lingered in the kitchen for hours afterward, and everyone knew what he'd had. He didn't care. The fish cost 30 cents a tin and kept him full until dinner. Lard and sugar bread was perhaps the simplest forgotten breakfast, nothing more than homemade bread spread with fresh lard and sprinkled with white sugar. The lard provided richness and fat that stuck to ribs during long mornings of work. The sugar added sweetness that made the combination feel almost indulgent. Children especially loved this sandwich, the sugar crystals crunching slightly against the smooth lard and soft bread. Making it took barely a minute, perfect for busy mornings when the wood stove was needed for other cooking. During the Depression and war years, this sandwich fed countless families when other breakfast options weren't available or affordable. The taste seems strange to modern palates accustomed to butter, but for generations raised on lard, this sandwich represented comfort and normalcy. It was food that didn't pretend to be fancy, yet delivered exactly what a body needed to start the day. Peanut butter and honey sandwiches were the gentle cousin of the classic peanut butter and jelly, quieter, softer, and maybe a little sweeter. Instead of fruit preserves, this version replaced the tang with something more mellow, something that stuck to the roof of your mouth and made your fingers smell like golden syrup all afternoon. It was the sandwich you got when the jelly jar was empty, but love was still in stock. A simple swipe of peanut butter on one slice, a drizzle of honey on the other, and two halves pressed together until the honey oozed just enough to make you pause. These sandwiches were often packed quickly, folded into wax paper, and slightly crushed by the weight of textbooks. But that did not matter. If anything, it made them better. There was something old-fashioned about it, something kind. Peanut butter and honey tasted like slow mornings, kind grandparents, and meals that did not need to be fancy to be filling. Today, they are harder to find in school cafeterias and less likely to show up in lunchboxes full of brand-name snacks. They called it the emergency sandwich because that is exactly what it was. The meal you made when nothing was left and someone still needed to eat. A 1920 recipe from the calendar of sandwiches and beverages laid it out. Hard-boiled eggs chopped with whatever pickle you had, bound with mustard and peanut butter, thinned with vinegar if the paste was too thick. Every ingredient was shelf-stable and already in the cupboard. The sandwich belonged to the 30s the way bread lines did, born when families opened their pantries and saw almost nothing. You made it because the alternative was sending your kids out with empty hands. Egg and peanut butter and pickle sound strange now, but strange was a luxury nobody could afford. You ate what was there. The recipe survived in church pamphlets and Depression-era cookbooks passed along by women who understood that feeding a family on nothing was its own kind of skill. Apple and sharp cheddar sandwich showcased the perfect marriage of sweet fruit and strong cheese, a favorite in New England, where crisp autumn apples were plentiful cooks, sliced tart apples thinly, and layered them with aged cheddar between slices of toasted rye bread. The mild heat of the toast softened the cheese slightly, allowing it to mingle with the juice of the apple for a balanced bite. This sandwich was a lunchtime staple for farmers who needed a meal that traveled well and stayed fresh during long days in the field. Children carried it to school, wrapped in wax paper, while parents enjoyed it with a hot cup of coffee at midday. Its popularity spread beyond the Northeast during the 1950s, when supermarkets made sharp cheddar more widely available even today. The combination of sharp, savory cheese and crisp, sweet apple stands out as a timeless example of how simple regional ingredients can create a sandwich that feels both rustic and refined without any unnecessary extras. When times grew tough in Depression-era America, families turned to preserving foods, making homemade spreads like apple butter, a prized pantry staple. The apple butter and cheese sandwich, a modest pairing of homemade apple butter and thinly sliced cheese, became a favorite because it cleverly combined two readily available ingredients into a filling, flavorful meal. Apple butter, a concentrated sweet spread slowly simmered from bruised or imperfect apples, allowed families to make use of fruit that otherwise might have gone to waste. Apples were abundant and inexpensive during the fall harvest, so resourceful home cooks preserved them carefully to ensure supplies lasted through harsher winter months. Cheese, although slightly more precious, was often rationed in thin slices, stretching each small block to maximize meals without emptying the purse. Cookbooks of the 1930s praised apple butter sandwiches as a satisfying way to provide necessary calories cheaply, perhaps quietly suggesting they tasted better than some other thrift-driven concoctions. If you grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, you know what an egg foo young sandwich is. If you grew up anywhere else, you've never heard of it. An egg foo young patty, eggs beaten with bean sprouts, scallions, and pork, pan-fried in a loose disc, between two slices of white bread with mayonnaise, lettuce, and dill pickles, a combination that should not have worked but absolutely did. The sandwich took root in St. Louis in the 1940s when Chinese-American restaurants began adapting for Midwestern customers who wanted familiar flavors in portable form. The briny pickle against the savory egg was the whole argument for its existence. By the 1970s, it was a fixture at old-school St. Louis lunch counters, surviving into the 80s before gradually fading. A handful of establishments still make it today. Everywhere else, it simply never happened. A community's gift to its neighbors that never reached the rest of the country. Leftover roast vegetable sandwiches were the kind of meal grandparents made when they refused to let anything go to waste. After dinner, they would gather whatever vegetables were left in the pan, fry them up in a little oil or leftover drippings, and stack them high between slices of bread. Carrots, potatoes, onions, squash, and anything else that happened to be sitting in the bowl all came together into something far better than you expected. The heat revived them, bringing back the flavors that had dulled after sitting out, and the bread turned it into a portable, handheld feast. It tasted warm, smoky, and rich, like something you would order from a corner cafe that prided itself on rustic charm. Grandparents knew how to stretch leftovers into entirely new meals, and this sandwich was one of their greatest hits. It was cheap, filling, and comforting, giving you a whole second dinner out of what everyone else would have thrown away. Eating it reminded you that grandparents never needed a recipe to impress you. They just needed a skillet, a little oil, and the sense to know that food could always be made new again. These sandwiches were thick, messy, and unforgettable, carrying with them the memory of kitchens where nothing was ever wasted and everything was always used with care. Number 17. The poke salad and egg sandwich. Pokeweed grows wild across the American South, and in the hills it was one of the first green things to come up in spring. But you had to know what you were doing. The raw plant is poisonous. You picked the young leaves before they got too big, boiled them in 3 changes of water to pull the toxins out, drained them, and fried them in bacon grease with scrambled eggs. The cooked greens tasted something like spinach, but earthier, and layered on bread with the eggs they made a sandwich that tasted like the woods themselves. Old-timers in the Ozarks and along the Appalachian ridges knew exactly when to pick poke and exactly how long to boil it. That knowledge passed from mother to daughter for generations. Today, most people walk right past pokeweed without recognizing it, and the sandwich walked away with them. Bacon dripping sandwiches turned saved cooking fat into meals delivering rich, smoky satisfaction without wasting precious bacon. Families saved bacon grease in jars beside the stove, the accumulated fat representing flavor wealth too valuable to discard. The drippings were spread onto bread while still warm, absorbing into the soft surface and creating butter-like richness. Salt was usually unnecessary since the bacon fat carried plenty, though some added pepper for warmth. The flavor was unmistakably bacon without requiring actual bacon, stretching the essence of expensive cured pork across many meals. During the Depression and wartime rationing, this sandwich appeared in households where meat was rationed or unaffordable. Children ate these without complaint because the smoky richness satisfied cravings that plain bread never could. The fat provided calories desperately needed by growing bodies and working adults. Seniors remember their mothers guarding the bacon grease jar, knowing those drippings transformed ordinary bread. Number 17. Tongue on rye with mustard. The slice was 1/4 of an inch thick, fanned across the rye in 3 overlapping pieces, topped with a smear of horseradish and a single round of yellow mustard. Beef tongue was cheap at the wholesale market on 14th Street, simmered for 4 hours with onions and bay leaves, peeled while still warm, and sliced cold on the bias. A tongue sandwich was 35 cents at Katz's in 1956. The flavor was rich and beefy, the texture more tender than brisket ever reached. The sandwich held its place on Jewish deli counters and corner luncheonettes through the late 70s. And then beef prices dropped. The immigrant generation aged out. The kids stopped ordering it. Katz's still serves it. Almost nobody else does. Your grandfather knew the rail cook by his first name, and the rail cook knew which mustard he wanted before he sat down. But decades before sardines and liverwurst filled factory lunchboxes, another kind of working lunch was holding its own in southeastern Massachusetts. The chow mein sandwich came out of Fall River in the 20s, where Chinese restaurant owners married crispy fried noodles with celery, bean sprouts, and shredded pork, smothered the whole thing in brown gravy, and stuffed it into a hamburger bun. It was carbs on carbs, noodles inside bread, and the textile workers who ate them at lunch counters didn't blink. Howard Johnson's picked it up. School cafeterias in Providence served it on Fridays during Lent, when Catholic families needed something filling. The gravy soaked through the bun in minutes, turning the bottom half into something you ate with a fork, and the flavor, salty, savory, faintly sweet from the bean sprouts, was worth the mess. Outside New England, almost nobody has heard of it. Inside Fall River, a handful of Chinese restaurants still serve them, each one a quiet monument to the cooks who figured out how to feed a mill town. Cornbread crumble sandwich was a resourceful breakfast that gave yesterday's cornbread new life with nothing more than buttermilk in a bowl. Leftover cornbread was crumbled into chunks, then covered with cold buttermilk until the bread softened but didn't completely dissolve. Some families added a spoon of sugar, others preferred it savory with a pinch of salt. The mixture was eaten with a spoon but carried the same satisfaction as any handheld sandwich. This wasn't elegant food, but rather survival cuisine that wasted nothing and provided genuine nourishment. The tangy buttermilk combined with the sweet cornmeal created a flavor profile that was distinctly Southern and deeply comforting. Farm families ate this during summer months when cold food appealed more than hot biscuits. Children grew up with this as a familiar breakfast option, never questioning its unusual form. The sandwich represented practical wisdom, showing how creativity could transform leftovers into something worth eating. Pimento cheese sandwiches were a Southern love letter written in cheddar, mayonnaise, and bright red pimentos, served between soft white bread and packed with personality. This was not just a sandwich. It was a tradition, a ritual, and sometimes a dare for kids unfamiliar with its bold, tangy flavor. The cheese was sharp. The mayonnaise mellowed it out. The pimentos? They brought color, a hint of sweetness, and that unmistakable peppery kick. Pimento cheese was often whipped into a spread and slapped onto sandwich bread before being wrapped in wax paper and tossed into a lunchbox. It squished a little, stained the paper orange, and always felt like it had something to prove. Some kids swapped them, others hid them, but everyone remembered them. It was not the kind of sandwich that blended in, and that was the point. Over the years, it slipped out of school cafeterias and into specialty food menus, but back then, it was a staple that defined a region and a generation. It was homemade, it was messy, and it was honest. Beef tongue on rye with horseradish and pickle was the most expensive sandwich at Mid-City Delicatessen in Manhattan during the 50s. 75 cents, top tier, same price as turkey. Jewish and German delis displayed whole tongues in their cases through the 60s, sliced to order by men who knew exactly how thin to cut. The meat was braised for hours until tender, peeled, and chilled, and the texture was unlike any other cut, silky, rich, with a depth that regular roast beef couldn't touch. You ate it cold on dark rye with horseradish sharp enough to clear your sinuses, a half-sour pickle on the side. It was whole animal butchery at its finest, a cut nobody wanted, turned into something people paid premium prices for. Katz's Deli in New York still serves it. But most people now would rather not think about where their sandwich came from. That squeamishness killed a craft that took real skill. Green pepper and cheese sandwich brought a satisfying crunch to the simple lunch plates of mid-century. America raw green pepper rings were layered onto slices of buttered bread and topped with a generous spread of sharp cheese. The contrast of crisp vegetables and creamy dairy created a refreshing combination that was both affordable and filling. Families appreciated how garden peppers stayed fresh for days, without refrigeration, making them a dependable choice for school lunches and quick suppers. This sandwich appeared in community cookbooks of the 1940s, where homemakers shared recipes that stretched ingredients during rationing efforts. Farmers enjoyed it during the harvest season when peppers were abundant and inexpensive, while children found the bright color and mild spice exciting. Compared to plainer fare, its straightforward preparation required no cooking, which made it perfect for hot summer evenings, when turning on the stove was unthinkable. Even though it has faded from modern menus, the green pepper and cheese sandwich remains a crisp reminder of resourceful American home cooking. Back in the harsh realities of the Great Depression, families turned to pantry essentials that delivered calories and sweetness without breaking their limited budgets. Enter the humble yet hearty molasses sandwich. Thick molasses, generously drizzled onto slices of bread and occasionally sprinkled with salt, emerged as a popular lunchtime choice, not just out of necessity, but because it provided a rare moment of sweet indulgence during tough times. Molasses, a byproduct of sugar refining, was affordable and accessible, often stored in large tins kept in kitchen pantries, becoming as familiar as flour or potatoes. Resourceful Depression-era homemakers appreciated that molasses offered not only sweetness, but essential nutrients like iron, magnesium, and calcium, long before modern health experts rediscovered its hidden nutritional punch. To combat monotony, some households cleverly balanced the syrupy sweetness by adding a pinch of salt, creating a flavor combination intriguing enough to make molasses sandwiches feel like a treat rather than a compromise. In fact, molasses was such a dependable Depression staple that families jokingly called it their liquid gold, humorously acknowledging its value while dreaming of better days. The hot, open-faced turkey sandwich was what the week after Thanksgiving looked like before anyone invented the leftover pot pie. It was also what Tuesday looked like in any decade when whole turkeys sold for under $1 a pound, which through the post-war years into the 1970s they often did. Sliced roast turkey laid over white bread, then the giblet gravy. Neck and giblets simmered an hour before the bird went in, the stock thickened with a flour roux, finished with the pan drippings poured generously. Television dinners of the era tried to replicate this in aluminum trays. They failed. The difference was the turkey drippings. That slightly sweet, mineral-depth chicken drippings never matched, and the way the bread absorbed at the edges while holding structure at the center. The TV dinner industry understood the concept. It could not replicate the smell of the kitchen in the 20 minutes before this hit the table. Cold meatloaf sandwiches were the unsung heroes of leftover night. The kind of meal that made you forget leftovers did not always have to feel like a downgrade. A slice of meatloaf, chilled just enough to hold its shape, was placed between soft bread and topped with mustard, ketchup, or whatever condiments were around. Grandparents knew the trick. Cold meatloaf had flavor that settled in overnight, making every bite taste even better than it did the day before. The sandwich felt like something you would order from a deli, thick, meaty, and packed with flavor that did not need any heating up. It was the definition of cheap food tasting expensive. Grandparents sliced it with the kind of confidence that came from thousands of meals served over a lifetime, and they always knew exactly how thick the slice needed to be to make the sandwich perfect. You would bite into it and suddenly remember how good simple food could be. Cold meatloaf sandwiches were proof that leftovers could shine, that yesterday's dinner could become today's comfort, and that grandparents had a way of making everything feel just a little better with the right touch. Number 16. Streak-o lean on white bread. Streak-o lean was the cheap cut of salt-cured pork belly that ran more fat than meat, just thin streaks of lean running through thick layers of white. You sliced it, fried it slow in its own grease until the edges curled and crisped, and laid it on a piece of white bread. The bread soaked up the drippings and went soft and almost translucent where the grease touched it. This was a supper sandwich in rural Georgia, Alabama, and the Carolina Piedmont, where streak-o lean cost half what bacon cost and lasted twice as long in the smokehouse. It was saltier than bacon and fattier than side meat, and people who grew up eating it will tell you it tasted better than both of them put together. You could argue that every sandwich on this list was born from the same arithmetic. Take what you have, divide it by the number of mouths at the table, and figure out how to make the answer feel like enough. That is not a recipe. That is survival math, and the women who ran it in their heads every day did not call it that. They called it Tuesday. They called it getting by. The hillbilly sandwich was never meant to impress anybody. It was meant to solve a problem that showed up 3 times a day, every single day, for decades. The fact that some of them tasted extraordinary was almost accidental. Flavor was a byproduct of necessity, not the goal. The goal was another day where everybody ate. Syrup sandwiches carried sweetness and energy to children who needed both during years when sugar was rationed and treats were rare. Sorghum, molasses, or cane syrup was drizzled generously over soft bread, sometimes topped with another slice, sometimes eaten open-faced. The dark, sticky sweetness spread across the bread like liquid candy, providing quick fuel for active children and tired workers alike. The flavor was deep and complex, far more interesting than plain sugar, with mineral notes and earthy undertones. Families kept jars of syrup in pantries throughout the South, using it as affordable sweetener when refined sugar cost too much. The sandwich required no cooking and assembled in seconds when hunger struck between meals. Children begged for these as treats, not realizing they were also survival food born from necessity. The syrup's thickness made the sandwich filling despite containing little actual nutrition beyond carbohydrates. Seniors remember the sticky fingers and satisfied smiles following every syrup sandwich. Number 16. Tuna melt. A short-order rail, one hot afternoon in 1959, tipped a bowl of tuna salad onto a half-grilled cheese sandwich and decided to keep going. The whole thing got pressed flat on the griddle and slid onto the plate. The customer asked for another. Within 3 years, the tuna melt was on lunch rails everywhere. Tuna salad on rye or sourdough, a single slice of cheese on top, a slick of butter on the griddle, heavy press for roughly 2 minutes each side. The cheese melted down into the tuna, the bread browned, the whole thing came off hot and a little messy. The fast food kitchens replaced the press with a panini machine, and the panini machine turned the tuna melt into something tighter and drier and entirely less interesting than the original. At the deli counter, olive loaf sat next to the bologna and the pimiento loaf in a row of pink processed meats that all looked vaguely related. It was bologna's stranger cousin, the same smooth, finely ground pork and beef, but shot through with chunks of green pimiento stuffed olives that stared back at you from every slice like tiny eyes. Oscar Mayer made the version most people knew, pre-packaged in thin slices with that particular plastic smell that clung to the meat no matter how fast you peeled it off. Paired with a slice of American cheese on white bread, it was a lunchbox constant for kids who didn't get to choose what they ate. Some loved the salty olive bursts, most tolerated them. A few traded the sandwich away before the bell rang. Oscar Mayer stopped making olive loaf quietly, the way all unfashionable foods disappear, not with an announcement but with an empty space on the shelf that nobody noticed until it was too late to say goodbye. Cracklin' Biscuit was a celebration of pig butchering season, featuring those crispy bits of rendered pork fat baked right into the bread itself. When families rendered lard, the leftover pieces of fried pork skin and fat became cracklins, crunchy morsels packed with flavor. These were folded into biscuit dough before baking, creating bread that was rich, salty, and satisfying straight from the oven. No additional filling was needed because the cracklins provided all the flavor and fat a body required. Split and buttered while still warm, these biscuits represented abundance during the season when fresh pork was available. The cracklins added textural interest, their crunch contrasting with the tender biscuit surrounding them. Families looked forward to butchering time partly because it meant cracklin' biscuits for breakfast. This sandwich connected people to the rhythm of rural life, where food followed seasons and nothing was ever wasted. Ham salad sandwiches were what you made when dinner became tomorrow's lunch, and nothing went to waste. Chopped leftover ham mixed with mayonnaise, a spoonful of relish, and maybe a dash of mustard turned into something far greater than the sum of its parts. The result was creamy, salty, tangy, and just textured enough to let you know this was not store-bought. It sat heavy on white bread and came wrapped in wax paper or pressed gently into a sandwich bag that stuck to the crust by lunch hour. Kids either loved ham salad or politely declined the swap. It had presence. A slightly chunky spread with pink edges and flecks of green. Grandparents swore by it. Cafeterias served it weekly, and for a long time, it was a way to turn leftovers into something that felt brand new. It was a lunchbox classic for those raised with one hand on the cutting board and the other on the budget. Today, it rarely shows up in modern school lunches, replaced by prepackaged options and flashier flavors. Of all the sandwiches that disappeared, prune butter might be the one that deserved a better reputation. Stewed prunes mashed into a dark, sticky paste and spread across day-old bread. That was a school lunch in the 40s and 50s, packed by mothers who knew dried fruit was cheap, filling, and wouldn't spoil in a tin pail. Some added cinnamon or a smear of butter to soften the intensity. Some mixed in chopped walnuts for texture. The result was dense and sweet, almost like jam, but earthier, with a chewiness that made it feel like real food instead of candy. Kids traded these away at the cafeteria table faster than anything else in the lunchbox. Prune had already become a punchline by the 50s, and no child wanted to be caught eating one. The mothers who packed them knew the nutritional value and didn't care about the jokes. They were feeding their kids on pennies. The kids who threw them away wished now they'd paid attention. Celery and pimento cream. Sandwich brought a cheerful burst of color to lunch tables across mid-century America, with crisp diced celery folded into soft cream cheese, dotted with vivid red pimentos. For a bite that was both crunchy and creamy in perfect balance, the mild heat of the pimento gave the filling a lively spark, while the celery kept each mouthful refreshing and light. This was a favorite at bridge parties and Sunday luncheons because it could be prepared hours ahead without losing its texture, and it looked beautiful, sliced into neat rectangles on silver trays. Women's magazines of the 1940s promoted it as an elegant yet economical option since both celery and canned pimentos were inexpensive, and widely available hosts loved how the sandwich appealed to children and adults alike, offering a vegetable-forward treat that still felt indulgent. Though it has vanished from most modern menus, the celery and pimento cream sandwich remains a bright reminder of creative home cooking that turned simple produce into something worthy of celebration. Corn has long been the reliable companion of American families, especially during the economic struggles of the 1930s. Frugality in the Depression-era kitchen meant nothing was wasted. Every spoonful mattered, leading to innovative dishes like the creamed corn sandwich. This sandwich featured leftover creamed corn thickened just enough to spread between slices of bread, transforming last night's side dish into today's main event. Corn was abundant, affordable, and deeply woven into American culinary heritage, so turning leftovers into sandwiches wasn't merely thrifty, it was practical culinary genius. Homemakers quickly realized that leftover creamed corn, thickened slightly with flour or stale breadcrumbs, could yield a surprisingly tasty sandwich spread. Creamed corn sandwiches became a clever way to feed large families without extra expense, all while sneaking in essential nutrients and fiber. Historical pamphlets even encouraged homemakers to use corn creatively, describing it humorously as the vegetable that kept giving, since families would see it repeatedly at meals, sometimes more than they wished. The Reuben Made at Home told you something about the household's ambitions. You weren't making one unless you were committed. Corned beef from the deli counter, not pre-sliced lunch meat. Swiss, not American. Sauerkraut drained and pressed dry. Thousand Island or Russian dressing depending on which side of the argument you fell on. Dark marble rye buttered on the outside. Everything into a cast iron skillet, weighted, flipped once, pulled when the cheese went glossy and the bread reached walnut shell brown. The origin debate, Arnold Reuben's restaurant in New York, 1914, or Reuben Kulikovsky at the Blackstone Hotel in Omaha in the 1920s, was irrelevant to the families making it on Friday nights. What mattered was the press of the sandwich, the way everything melted together under weight and heat into something that tasted like it had always existed. Without the weight and the heat, you had ingredients. That distinction was the whole recipe. Ham salad sandwiches were the kind of thrift brilliance grandparents mastered without ever bragging about it. They would take leftover ham, chop it with practiced ease, and mix it with mayonnaise, relish, and a touch of mustard until it became a creamy, tangy blend that tasted like something from a small-town deli. Spread thick on soft bread, it felt like a proper lunch even though it came from scraps and habit. The smell of ham and relish filling the kitchen was enough to make anyone hungry, and the taste was always rich but never heavy, balanced even without a written recipe. Grandparents simply knew when it needed more relish or another spoonful of mayonnaise. Ham salad sandwiches tasted like comfort shaped by experience, a reminder that inexpensive food could still feel generous and deeply satisfying. They were born from frugality, but remembered as pure warmth. Number 15, the sorghum and butter biscuit. Sorghum molasses was the sweetener of the southern mountains long before white sugar became affordable. Families grew sorghum cane in small plots, cut it in the fall, and pressed the stalks through a horse-drawn mill. The juice ran into an evaporator pan set over a wood fire and cooked down into a thick, amber syrup with a flavor deeper and more complex than honey. You split a hot biscuit, spread butter on one side and a heavy pour of sorghum on the other, and pressed them together. The butter and the sorghum mixed into something rich and golden that ran down your fingers if you were not careful. Every country store in Kentucky and Tennessee sold sorghum in mason jars through the 1960s. Today it is a specialty item that costs $8 a jar. For 100 years, it was the cheapest sweet thing in the hills. Lard sandwiches represented the absolute bottom of Depression-era survival food, yet they kept families alive when nothing else remained in the pantry. Pure rendered pork fat was spread onto bread like butter, sprinkled with salt, and eaten without complaint by hungry mouths. The texture was smooth and greasy, coating the tongue with richness that plain bread could never provide. The flavor was subtle, vaguely porky, with satisfaction that came from the fat's density and calories. During the hardest years, when even margarine was unaffordable, lard became the spread of necessity. Families rendered their own from pork scraps or bought it cheaply from butchers who had plenty. The sandwich provided essential calories that kept bodies functioning through hard labor and cold winters. Children ate them without knowing they were eating poverty food because their parents served them with dignity. Seniors who survived those years remember lard sandwiches with complicated emotions, grateful for the nourishment, yet haunted by the desperation. Number 14, SOS, chipped beef gravy over toast. Soldiers had 3 letters for it, and your grandfather knew all 3. The polite version was, "Save our souls." Every American diner counter ran it on the breakfast menu from 1948 through about 1972. Dried beef, rinsed of salt, simmered in a quick milk and butter gravy that the rail thickened with a pinch of flour, then ladled hot over a stack of buttered white toast. Veterans of the Second World War had eaten the same dish thrice weekly in mess halls overseas, and when they came home, they wanted it on a plate around dawn before the morning shift kicked off. It was 40 cents at a Pittsburgh diner in 1955. The coffee was a dime. The plate came hot, the gravy thick, the beef salty and chewy in a way that woke a man up like a slap on the cheek. A trucker could finish 2 plates and a black coffee in 15 minutes flat and be on the road before sunrise. The dish disappeared as the diners themselves disappeared, as the McDonald's drive-thrus took over the breakfast trade. Your grandfather could still make a perfect one at home. Most cooks under 50 have never heard the name. The women's club circuit ran on cream cheese and walnut sandwiches the way Detroit ran on gasoline. Every chapter meeting, every library fundraiser, every garden society luncheon had a tray of them. Thin rounds of Thomas's date nut bread spread with whipped cream cheese and pressed together with a layer of chopped walnuts between. The bread came out of a can, dense and sweet, sliced with a serrated knife into discs so thin the light came through. The cream cheese had to be room temperature, or it tore the bread apart. The walnuts had to be chopped fine, not minced, not halved, but fine, because the texture needed to disappear into the bite. These were not sandwiches you made for yourself. You made them for a room full of women who would notice if the bread was too thick or the cream cheese too cold. The standard was unspoken but absolute, and the women who met it did so without recipes, without measuring cups, and without ever being told they'd done it right. Sorghum biscuit was the mountain sweetener's answer to fancy breakfast pastries, featuring that thick amber syrup poured over hot split biscuits. Sorghum, pressed from tall cane stalks grown in Appalachian hollows, had a distinctive flavor that was earthier and less refined than molasses or honey. The syrup was drizzled generously over buttered biscuits still steaming from the oven, pooling in the bread's soft interior. Children licked their fingers clean after every bite, savoring the mineral-rich sweetness that no store-bought syrup could match. Families grew their own sorghum cane and pressed it at community mills each fall, creating enough syrup to last through winter. The flavor carried hints of smoke and grass, a taste that connected people directly to the land they worked. This sandwich required nothing fancy, just fresh biscuits and homemade syrup. Yet it delivered satisfaction that modern breakfast treats cannot replicate. Sorghum biscuits represented self-sufficiency and the pride of producing your own sweetness. The cheese and pickle sandwich was for the kids who liked things sharp and sour, a little strange, and completely satisfying. A thick slice of cheddar, sometimes aged, layered with sweet pickles or tangy dill slices, pressed between slices of sandwich bread, often white, occasionally wheat. It was a flavor bomb. Salty cheese met vinegary crunch, and somehow the combination made more sense than you would think. This was not a loud sandwich. It did not leak or crumble or stain your lunch bag. It sat there quietly, confident in its simplicity. You either craved it or could not stand it. But for those who loved it, it was perfect. It was the kind of sandwich you could eat cold, no heating or fuss required. It stayed intact. It delivered every time. Over the years, cheese and pickle became more of a British delicacy than an American staple. But there was a time when this sandwich showed up in lunchboxes across the country. Today, it is rarely seen in school cafeterias. Years before deli meat came sealed in plastic, ham salad was ground fresh every morning behind the counter. Leftover ham, the end of a holiday roast, scraps too small to slice, went through the grinder with celery, sweet pickles, hard-boiled egg, and mayonnaise, turning remnants into a spread worth sitting down for. A single ham bone produced enough to feed a family for 3 days. The sandwich was a deli fixture through the 50s and 60s, scooped onto bread with lettuce and tomato. Food safety fears killed it. Concerns about mayo at room temperature scared a generation away from anything served from a bowl behind glass. Pre-packaged alternatives replaced it, sealed and sterile and tasting like nothing at all. The women who ground that ham every morning made leftovers taste like a first course. That skill went quiet when they did. Ham and pickle relish sandwich delivered a zesty twist to leftover ham by grinding it fine and mixing it with sweet pickle relish and a dab of mustard until the filling became a tangy spread that woke up any slice of bread. It was a thrifty recipe that turned holiday leftovers into weekday lunches, stretching every bit of meat during the lean years of the 1940s. Community cookbooks praised it for its bold flavor and economical use of ingredients. Families enjoyed the bright contrast of salty ham and sweet relish, while the mustard added a gentle heat that cut through the richness. It traveled well wrapped in wax paper for school or factory lunches, and stayed moist without refrigeration, making it a favorite of workers and picnickers alike. As the years passed, delicatessens shifted toward heavier cured meats, and the humble ham and pickle relish sandwich faded from menus, but its lively balance of sweet, sour, and savory still deserves a modern revival. Exotic fruits like bananas became virtually unattainable luxuries during the economic hardships of the 1930s, prompting desperate yet brilliant substitutions from ordinary American pantries. Enter the mock banana sandwich, cleverly disguising boiled mashed parsnips sweetened with sugar and a dash of artificial banana flavoring. Parsnips, previously overlooked root vegetables that thrived in backyard gardens, found unexpected stardom in this culinary sleight of hand. Housewives quickly realized their earthy taste softened when boiled, making them surprisingly receptive to imitation fruit flavors. Banana extract, once used sparingly in desserts, was suddenly celebrated for turning humble parsnips into a believable tropical treat. It's ironic that parsnips were elevated from root cellar obscurity to sandwich fame simply because real bananas became too costly for most American tables. Historical records show these sandwiches appeared regularly in Depression-era cookbooks, praised as creative alternatives that allowed families to maintain dietary variety despite limited budgets. Of course, modern taste buds might question whether parsnips truly captured the banana experience. After all, impersonating fruit is tough business. But many Depression-era children reportedly enjoyed the illusion enough to ask for seconds. But before any of those diner sandwiches reached the suburban kitchen, something older had been feeding the Midwest for 50 years already. You couldn't make a loose meat sandwich by accident. You had to know why the meat was supposed to fall apart. Fred Angel opened the first Maid-Rite in Muscatine, Iowa in 1926. Seasoned ground beef cooked slow in beef broth until the liquid was almost gone. Not a patty, not sauced like a sloppy Joe, just loose, crumbly beef spooned onto a steamed bun with yellow mustard and dill pickles. No sauce, no ketchup. The meat was the thing, and the thing about it was restraint, a philosophy that spread across Iowa and into surrounding states through the 1960s and 70s, showing up at high school cafeterias for a quarter and church basements on Friday nights. If you had to ask what held the sandwich together, the answer was nothing. That was the point. Potato salad sandwiches were the kind of meal that made perfect sense to grandparents, even if they surprise people now. Leftover potato salad never went to waste. It became a cool, creamy filling tucked between slices of bread, turning into something far richer than the cost behind it. The soft potatoes, the dressing, the crunch of onions or celery all blended into a hearty mixture that felt surprisingly complete. It tasted like a picnic you could hold in your hand, like summer afternoons and easy, familiar gatherings. Grandparents understood how to stretch food, and potato salad was one of those dishes that could go further than anyone expected. The sandwich was inexpensive, satisfying, and comforting in that quiet way their meals always were. They had a talent for turning yesterday's leftovers into something worth remembering, and this sandwich was one of their simplest successes. Number 14. The fried catfish sandwich. The catfish came out of every creek, pond, and river bottom in the hill country. You caught it on a trot line or a cane pole baited with chicken liver, cleaned it on the bank, and carried it home in a bucket. The breading was cornmeal, salt, black pepper, and nothing else. You heated lard in a cast-iron skillet until a pinch of cornmeal sizzled the second it hit the surface, and you laid the fillets in gently because a catfish fillet will fall apart if you handle it rough. The fish fried for about 4 minutes on each side until the cornmeal crust turned dark gold and the meat inside went white and flaky. You set the fillets on a piece of brown paper to drain, then laid them on white bread with a slice of raw onion and a squirt of yellow mustard. The bread went soft against the hot fish, and the cornmeal crust stayed crunchy where it pressed against the onion. Friday nights in the Ozarks and the Tennessee Valley, this was what people ate. Church fish fries served them by the hundreds. Families who lived near water ate catfish sandwiches twice a week because the fish was free and the cornmeal cost next to nothing. The combination of free protein and penny cornmeal made the fried catfish sandwich one of the most economical meals in the rural South. Commercial catfish farming changed everything in the 1980s. Farm-raised catfish tastes milder, cleaner, and nothing like the wild mudcat that made these sandwiches what they were. People who remember pulling a channel cat off a trot line at dawn and eating it fried on bread by noon know there is no substitute. Cheese Dream sandwiches were the elegant cousin of simple grilled cheese, topped with bacon or tomato, and broiled until bubbly and golden. Open-faced and sophisticated, they appeared in women's magazines during the 1940s and 1950s as budget-friendly luncheon fare. A slice of bread was topped with cheese, sometimes with bacon strips underneath, then placed under the broiler until the cheese melted and developed brown spots. The result was more refined than standard grilled cheese, feeling almost like restaurant food despite humble ingredients. Housewives served these at bridge clubs and ladies' luncheons, proving that economy didn't mean sacrificing presentation. Children considered them special treats, fascinated by the bubbling cheese under the broiler's heat. The open-faced design meant one slice of bread instead of two, stretching resources further. Seniors remember cheese dreams as the fancy version of everyday sandwiches, proof that creativity could elevate simple ingredients into something extraordinary. Number 12. Pimento cheese on rye. At Augusta National in 1947, a couple named the Herndons sold pimento cheese sandwiches on the course for 25 cents apiece, and the recipe spread from there to every drugstore counter in the South within a decade. The mix was sharp cheddar, grated coarse, jarred pimentos drained and chopped, mayonnaise, a pinch of cayenne, and black pepper, all stirred until the orange paste held together but still showed the red flecks. You ate it on rye, white, or pumpernickel, cold, with a sweet pickle and a glass of sweet tea. A Walgreens in Atlanta listed pimento cheese on rye for 30 cents in 1955. A Liggett's in Charlotte ran a Saturday special at 20. The pimento cheese sandwich has held on better than most on this list. Even so, the drugstore counter version is gone. The lunch counters that built their reputation on this sandwich were inside Woolworth stores that desegregated in 1960 after 4 students sat down and refused to leave for 5 months running. The counters kept their stools through 1993 and then closed for good. The sandwich outlived the counter that made it famous, which is the strangest small monument the food world has. If the cream cheese and walnut sandwich was a quiet act of precision, the frosted ribbon loaf was the showpiece it was building toward. The Better Homes and Gardens new cookbook printed the recipe in 1973, but the dish had circulated through bridal showers and baby showers since the late 40s. You took an unsliced loaf of white bread, trimmed the crusts, cut it into horizontal layers like a cake, and filled each layer with a different spread: ham salad, egg salad, pimiento cheese, deviled ham with pickle. Then you frosted the whole thing in whipped cream cheese tinted pastel pink or green, chilled it until firm, and sliced it at the table. The gasps were the point. It looked like a cake and ate like a sandwich, and the woman who carried it in had spent the previous evening assembling it in silence while her family slept. The Swedish called theirs smörgåstårta and still make it for midsummer. Here, it faded with the last generation of women who considered a layered sandwich a competitive sport. Fried cornmeal cake sandwich was a quick breakfast made from pantry staples that every rural household kept on hand. Cornmeal was mixed with water, salt, and maybe a bit of sugar to form a thick batter that was spooned into a hot greased skillet. The cakes fried quickly, developing crispy golden exteriors while staying tender inside, their corn-sweet flavor needing little enhancement. Eaten between bread slices or simply stacked and drizzled with syrup, these cakes provided carbohydrates and energy for the day ahead. The preparation took barely 5 minutes from mixing bowl to plate, making it perfect for mornings when time was short. Cornmeal was cheap and shelf-stable, available even when other ingredients ran low. Children grew up eating these cakes without complaint, their simple flavor becoming associated with home and comfort. This sandwich proved that breakfast didn't require expensive ingredients, just a hot skillet and the knowledge passed down through generations of country cooks. Chicken salad sandwiches were the quiet heroes of the lunchroom, the kind of sandwich that looked unassuming but delivered comfort in every bite. They started with leftover chicken, chopped fine or shredded, then folded into mayonnaise with bits of celery, sometimes a hint of onion, maybe a touch of mustard or dill. It all depended on who made it. Every family had their version. Some were creamy, some were chunky, some were elegant enough for tea parties and school lunch alike. Slapped between slices of white wheat or a buttered roll, chicken salad was never flashy, but it never disappointed. It felt like home, like Sundays turned into Mondays. It was cold, clean, and quietly satisfying. Kids who got a chicken salad sandwich in their lunchbox were either praised or pitied, depending on who you asked, but they always remembered it. Today, chicken salad has migrated to cafe menus and plastic deli containers, far from its humble homemade origins. James Beard, the man who wrote the book on American cooking, literally, loved almost nothing more than a sweet onion sandwich. Thick slices of Bermuda or Vidalia onion, layered on buttered white bread with mayonnaise, salt, and black pepper. That was it. No meat, no cheese, no distraction. He wrote about it with the kind of passion most chefs reserve for truffles, insisting the onion had to be sweet enough to eat raw and the bread soft enough to compress under a gentle press. The sandwich had a small, devoted audience through the 50s and 60s, mostly among people who took beards seriously and understood that simplicity was its own mastery. It never went mainstream, the raw onion, and the breath it left behind ensured that. But for the people who made it, nothing else came close. Beard died in 1985, and the sandwich barely outlived him. The kind of cook who trusted a single raw ingredient to carry an entire meal is rarer now than a Vidalia onion in January. Date and orange marmalade sandwich combined the deep caramel sweetness of cooked dates with the bright citrus zing of orange marmalade to create a filling that tasted like sunshine captured between two slices of wheat bread. Home cooks discovered it through women's magazines in the 1940s when sugar shortages made dates a practical, natural sweetener. The marmalade added a fragrant bitterness that balanced the richness of the dates, turning each bite into a layered experience of sweet tart and slightly bitter flavors, often served at afternoon teas and bridal showers. The sandwich brought a touch of elegance without expensive ingredients. Its vibrant color and unique taste impressed guests who expected plain fare, but instead found something sophisticated. It kept well without refrigeration, which made it ideal for picnics and train journeys. Though rarely seen today, the date and orange marmalade sandwich remains a reminder of a time when simple pantry staples could become a striking treat worthy of any gathering. When eggs became scarce during the Depression, Americans discovered a sandwich that cleverly defied logic: an eggless egg salad sandwich. At its heart, it was a crafty blend of crumbled tofu or leftover mashed potatoes combined with mustard, homemade mayonnaise substitutes, and chopped pickles. Though tofu may seem surprisingly trendy now, it had quietly existed in America since the late 1800s, mostly unnoticed until economic necessity thrust it into the spotlight. Families that couldn't access tofu creatively repurposed leftover mashed potatoes, turning yesterday's side dish into a satisfying sandwich filling. Depression-era homemakers found mustard's sharp bite and pickles' tanginess essential in creating the illusion of traditional egg salad flavor, ingeniously masking the absence of real eggs. Interestingly, mayonnaise substitutes, often a mixture of flour paste, vinegar, and seasoning, were promoted widely through government pamphlets and cooking columns as money-saving kitchen miracles. Food writers enthusiastically suggested these eggless spreads provided all of the flavor, none of the hen, helping families laugh through tough culinary adjustments. The French bread pizza sandwich, called a stromboli in Indiana, called nothing in dozens of Midwestern kitchens that made it without naming it, lived at the crossroads of the home pizza craze and the Italian sub-tradition in the 1970s. Nazareno Romano had created the original rolled stromboli in 1950 in Essington, Pennsylvania. What arrived in Midwestern home kitchens was simpler: Italian or French bread sliced lengthwise, pizza sauce from a jar, browned Italian sausage, mozzarella from a block, everything under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and the kitchen smelled like a pizza restaurant. Ground sausage at Nick's English Hut in Bloomington, Indiana, became so well known that alumni still talk about it decades later, and the home version followed. It faded when frozen pizza got cheap enough that making it yourself felt unnecessary, and a generation stopped pulling it from the oven with their own hands. Corned beef hash sandwiches were the kind of meal that made you feel like you were sitting in a greasy spoon diner, even if you were just sitting at your grandparents' old wooden table. Corned beef hash had that unmistakable sizzle, that pan-fried aroma that filled the entire kitchen and made you feel hungry. Even if you had just eaten, grandparents would crisp it up just right, letting it brown at the edges and soften in the center until it tasted like something straight off a restaurant griddle. Then they would press it between slices of bread, flattening it slightly so the heat melted everything together in this satisfying, hearty way. The sandwich was salty, savory, warm, and deeply filling. It tasted like a blue-collar morning, the kind of breakfast you would grab before a long day of work. But when grandparents made it, it was more than fuel. It was a piece of their own memories, carried forward into yours. Corned beef hash sandwiches were cheap, simple, and unforgettable, because they felt like a meal with history behind it. Every bite tasted like the countless mornings grandparents woke early, cooked quickly, and made sure everyone started the day full. They transformed canned or leftover hash into something that tasted miles above its humble ingredients. Here are 60 forgotten poor man sandwiches no one makes anymore. Those were 60 sandwiches that kept families fed when the budget said otherwise. Some were born out of necessity, others out of pure creativity, but every single one carried a story worth remembering. If your mother or grandmother made one of these, or if you still make one yourself today, drop it in the comments below. You would be surprised how many people watching right now grew up in the same kind of kitchen you did. And if this brought back a good memory, hit subscribe so you never miss another trip back to the meals that shaped who we are. Until next time, keep cooking with what you have.